All right. Good evening, everyone. Glad to see you all here. Looks like we've had some beautiful weather over the last few days. First thing I'm going to do is go over some housekeeping, and then we'll start into the chapter 16, I think it is, on price. And we'll talk about how the rest of the school year is going to run. So tonight, tonight will be the last night that I will be here in this room, okay? And so if you look right now, you will see that on tonight, we'll be talking about pricing. The week, April 13th, already has a recording for designing and managing integrated marketing channels. And then the last 2 weeks, April 20th and April 27th, will be Zoom meetings. And both of these Zoom meetings will be on the presentation of your cases, okay? So we've talked about the cases, and we'll go through them again about what I would like to see in terms of the structure. Each of you will, each of your groups will present a case. The case will be both a presentation, a PowerPoint, and it will be a physical document as well, okay? And so we talked about those earlier in the year, and so we'll talk about the pieces that I would like to see. First off, like the cases, and as we talked about in the first part of the year, the case is an issue just exactly like the ones that we talked about with Martha Stewart, and then also with the one that we had about the LG smartphone. You have, in essence, a setup, you have an issue, and the issue can be one main factor, or it can be several underlying factors as well. And so in order to solve these particular problems, what you're going to need to do is try to understand first the place where these corporations are, determine what is their ultimate strategies on the way forward, and then also the minor points that need to be fixed along the same time as well. These cases have big problems, and the cases have small problems. And some of them require big solutions, and some require small solutions. And one of the things also to notice, like when we talked about the LG phone, sometimes the cases come up with answers that you might not have even considered, such as the fact of perhaps you shouldn't even have a strategy at all. And that would be, I would not say that any of those fall into that, but I do think that you should think in unexpected ways, and sometimes you'll come up with very unique solutions, okay? And so the cases right now are four. They are the case for Swatch, the case for Steel Tools, the case for Under Armour, and then the final is the case for Apple. You can choose which one of these cases you wish, consult with your groups. The first one who asks to do a particular case wins, okay? So if your group wants to do the Apple case, send it to me as quickly as you possibly can. And whichever one remains, I mean, I'll just do the process of elimination all the way through. Each one of these cases are in a different time frame than today. And so the case for Swatch, I believe, is in 2007, 2008. The case for Steel is around 2010. For Under Armour, it's around 2015. And the case for Apple is a unique one because it's right after the death of Steve Jobs. The case for Apple is a big one because you're trying to think and consider the future of Apple after the founder died. Steel is a unique case. Well, you know, if I keep going into this, you're going to come up with strategies, okay? But, you know, that's just the basic setup for those, okay? So without giving anything else away, Swatches are manufacturers of watches. Steel is Steel Tools, which of course you see all over hardware stores. And they're usually in independent hardware stores. And Under Armour is exactly what you remember it to be. Under Armour is a manufacturer of what is known as an anti-wicking technology that is used for professional sports wearing. Okay, so those give you briefly an idea of each one of these. So if you look at, and we scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that on April 20th, the groups will present Under Armour and Swatch. And then on April 27th, week 15, groups will present Steel and Apple. Even if you do not present, I do want you to log on online and participate in the discussion afterwards, because there will be discussion with each one of those cases, okay? So if we go back and we looked at what we had discussed at the beginning of the year, if you notice here for individual case papers, we're not going to worry about those, okay? For the PowerPoint, this is also the way that I would like for you to make your paper as well, okay? And so the beginning of the paper is going to be what's known as the executive summary, okay? The executive summary starts with the critical issues that face the company, the basic recommendations based upon the critical issues. The executive summary is the general synopsis of the marketing plan, and it's always written last, because all of these are things that you have to discover as you look through the case itself. I would like to add also, after the executive summary, I would like for you in the PowerPoint presentation to give me a history of the company. Because that is one thing that you're going to have in these particular cases. These cases come right from the Harvard Business Review. The next section is going to be the SWOT analysis. And of course, we've talked pretty extensively about what the SWOT is and what it does. This will be the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The next section will be discussing how the firm can match its strengths to the opportunities to create capabilities in serving the customer's needs. I want you to look at the list of the strengths, those things that are inside the organization, and match them against the opportunities that are out there in the future, and show where we can provide some vision to the future and how those things augment and help our consumers. Remember also that those things we can't control are opportunities and threats, and those things that we can are strengths and weaknesses. Strengths and weaknesses are micro, they're in the organization. Opportunities and threats are macro, they're external to the organization. Are there any ways to compensate the weaknesses other than growing by strength? Does the firm possess any major liabilities or limitations that might limit growth or might tint or appeal to the consumer? Remember also that the competitive advantage is the thing that your particular corporation does that the other companies can't. And so next is we talk about the strategic focus. Are we going to be aggressive? Are we going to diverse what we have? Are we going to retract, go to a smaller group? Are we going to do a niche marketing? Okay. How does this make us unique and stronger than the other companies that are around us? And then summary is a conclusion with your objectives and the estimated time frame. Not big on that one. Now, each one of these cases does have something big, one big kind of thing in them, okay? And trying to discover that actual big thing is something of like mining for gold. And so, as I've said before, when we started this out, read them twice. Read them the first time through, read the second time, get out your highlighter. Remember, just like we did with Martha Stewart, underline the facts. Whenever you see a fact or whenever you see something important, take those particular facts and line them up, start figuring out where they come out on the SWOT analysis. And when you do all of those things, that's when the pictures will start coming into your head, okay? All right, so as I said before, this will be the last one that we're here. I really appreciate all of this. You've been fine students. It's been pretty tough as well. The next two sessions, as I said, those two sessions will be online and they will be Zoom meetings. The groups will present on Zoom and I will record them and then I will grade them, okay? All right, super. Okay, so let's move along. And
Dr. Shows?
Yes, go right ahead.
A quick question. So I just want to be clear. So we have a group paper associated with the case and a group presentation associated with the case, and then the final exam. Those are the three things that we have left to do for this particular class. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, you have the paper to do. The paper and the presentation, of course, will be together. But that and then the final exam, which will be on Exam Lead.
Okay, there's no individual paper due for other case assignments or anything else. I just want to be clear.
No, Chad, I took that out, okay?
Okay.
I've been reviewing with the other professors. One of the things y'all filled out a survey is that you said, I wish y'all can coordinate together. And so I was working with your other professors and I find out they're loading you up. So I'm gonna be a nice guy, okay? So instead of you having to do the individual papers, the case papers will be what I need, okay?
Awesome, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Chad. Okay. Okay, so without further ado, let us roll on, and we're talking about pricing strategies, okay? So, anybody ever look at a black shirt and wonder how much it is? So, I did some pricing and I looked for the price of a black shirt. And so I went online and I found H&M. Anybody know, by the way, who owns H&M or where it's from? Sweden. My wife loves it. Everything my daughter's wears is H&M. I don't know what we're paying on import taxes, but it's got to be gigantic. So H&M, a regular black shirt, is $7.90. A shirt from the Gap is $14.90, and an Armani shirt is $275. It's a black shirt, okay? Yet, having said that, each one of those shirts carries a value, and consumers pay for them and pay gladly. And so if you can kind of understand this slide and kind of put it in your head, you can understand pricing, and especially to understand that pricing is as much a strategic thing to manipulate as much as everything else, okay? So if we look at the history of pricing, one of the things that we're going to find generally is that how most companies price is that if you're a small company, generally that's left up to the boss. And so the boss will generally come in and they'll set a price for something, and that price will hold and it will stay that way. And many times the price of those goods might die with the boss. What you find in large corporations, usually that is given over to generally a division or a product line or managers. It could even be the accountants who are sitting there shaving. One of the worst things that happened in accounting is in the 80s, when the beautiful thing about spreadsheets came along, and they figured out just how much assets or how much profit they could have if they just made it 1 penny more. And that's one of the sad things about when pricing came around, is that pricing as a value statement is not considered important. How companies should price is that they need to understand consumer pricing psychology. They have to understand how consumers divine and understand and take in what a price is, because after all, a price is the value that the consumers exchange for a good. And so if we're going to go ahead and price a particular item, what we need to do is understand the setting and the adapting and the changing of prices from a much broader spectrum, that we should have a systematic approach in ways in order to understand and calculate and take price, okay? So, one of the things that we understand, especially in consumer psychology, is that consumers hold prices to be something of a value. And that consumers will purchase on what they perceive, what they consider the actual price to be, and not the marketer's stated price. And so many times what consumers will have is what's known as an internal reference price. If I were to ask you, how much are you going to spend for a Coke, a 20-ounce bottle of Coke at a convenience store, would anybody give me an answer? At a convenience store.
$3.
$3, that's logical. Yeah, I can see that. I could also expect that I could go into a Walmart or I could go into a Lowe's and I could get 4 of those for perhaps $6 as well. The reference price, the internal reference price, is one of the guideposts in which we use. And so when we are pricing goods, one of the important things is to understand where consumers perceive a price to be. And many times it's not a good thing to be below that reference price as well, because we perceive that those goods are either fake or not good. So when I was pricing, looking for my Toyota Highlander, I had what I consider to be ballparks that I was looking at. I was looking for under 40,000 miles, and I was looking to spend 25 grand. All right, that was kind of the phrases. that what I would see on cars or cargurus.com, if I were to see a vehicle with 20,000 miles costing $20,000, my first thought is something was wrong with it, and I was usually right. I would go out and get the hot Carfax on it, and I would see accident, and I would immediately throw that out. And that's an example where consumers use an internal reference price, and it's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good guide that consumers use. One of the things that consumers also do is what's known as a price quality inference. As I said before, price is a symbol in consumer minds as quality. And that if we're paying too little for a price, there's a very big concern that we're putting out money for nothing, that there is in essence something inherently bad in what we're buying. And so we also must understand that when consumers buy things, there's the expectation that you get what you pay for. And the last is, in terms of psychology, is the concept of price endings, okay? So I'll give you an example of what I mean, okay? How much is that?
$2.99.
$2.99. Is that more like 300 or more like 200?
300.
But you got to fight it, don't you? Okay. And the reasons why is that we read prices from left to right. Okay. And odd number pricing is something that has come about, I don't know, in the last 80 years or so. And what this says to your mind, whether you believe it or not, is that this item is closer to the 200 price than it is to the 300. And as a matter of fact, what Walmart found out is that if we really get wild and crazy with this last number, we in essence don't know what the price is, okay? And so odd number pricing is one of those things that consumers uses that states that I'm actually getting a bargain when I might be saving $4, okay? And so in price endings, what we do find is that consumers actually get more value out of this at $2.99 than they do for $300. And so it's something else that's important to know. It's known as the odd ending tactic. Consumers will perceive things as a bargain because, once again, as I said, they read left to right. Now, I wanted to show you this. I don't know if any of you ever have seen this before, but this is what's known as a Polaroid XS70 land camera. My dad bought one of these in the 70s. Polaroids, way back in the 70s or in the 60s, you had what were known as Instamatic cameras. And what Instamatic was instead of you having to take whatever film you had in your pictures, like you had 24 films, you had to go take those to like the grocery store or 24-hour photomat. What Instamatics did is that you could take a picture, pull it out, kind of keep the sun away from it, put lacquer across it, and you'd have a picture. Well, this was the next generation up. This was the Polaroid SX70 land camera, and this was a major jump in technology. And it's kind of hard to see it, but this was really unique, and we're talking about 50 years ago, okay? So one of the things that you might not notice is it can actually fold flat, okay? It had an electronic eye on it, so it had an automatic focus. It would work generally as a portrait, so it can work from 6 to 20 feet, but it would do infinite. It had the view focus lens there. And the way it would work is when you take a picture, it would spit the film out this way, and it had 8 per canister, okay? Well, Polaroid made 250,000 of these things, and they sold them for $249 using the odd ending. But the problem is that all of the research told them that the Polaroid land camera, the SX70, would be popular at $100, and that consumers would only buy those items if they were that particular price. And so what happened is, even though it was a brilliant piece of technology, is it languished in sales for about 18 months until Polaroid dropped the prices on the original SX70s to around 100, and people bought them in droves. What Polaroid also did was they created this little item that was called the One Step. And if you notice, it's the direct descendant of the SX70s. It doesn't fold down, it's plastic, it's basically for portraits. You have to be like 6 feet away, you take the picture, it does the same thing. And then if you notice, it had a flash bar that would go on top of it. And it sold for around $99 and did well. One of the things that this does is what I'm attempting here is to try to discuss the fact is that prices have to be where consumers can buy them. And if we go back to the original chapter 1, and I talked about demand. Demand is the desire for consumers to buy the goods with the ability to purchase them. The unfortunate thing is that the land camera didn't fail because it wasn't popular. It failed because it was simply too expensive. So having given that, we have to decide in our minds, how do we go about setting prices, okay? And so we're going to talk about a few of them in this list. The first thing that we want to do when we're coming up with a price is setting the objective for the price of our goods. And so the most unfortunate one, or most unfortunate example, is survival. Generally, these are corporations that are plagued with overcapacity. They have intense competition, or consumer wants are constantly changing. What companies do when they price via survival is that they simply want to be able to cover their variable and their fixed cost. I would think of the desktop industry right now as in something of that phase. Although I've heard desktops are trying to kind of climbing out of their myopia over the last decade or so. But generally, the margins on desktop PCs are around 6%, which is pretty miserable, okay? Maximum current profit is exactly what it says. They try to achieve a price that maximizes the current profits for those particular goods. They have determined that the alternatives to their particular item are few and far between. And so what they're attempting to do is make the most money while they can. When Apple came out with the iPads, the first initial ones, I think their price was around $650. And then immediately after 3 months, they dropped the price by $300 and made a lot of people mad. Now the maximum market share is where you can start out with a product, but basically what the pricing strategy is that you want to achieve the largest amount of the market that you can, because you believe that economies of scale are going to be the thing that will achieve your profit. So Texas Instruments was always in this. Texas Instrument calculators from the very beginning in the 70s were priced extremely reasonable at a time of intense competition, because for them, the more important thing was the making of processors. Price quality leadership is the last one I want to talk about. And what price quality leadership is, leans towards what's known as an affordable luxury. They want to be the price quality leader in the market. And they want to be priced just high enough to not be out of the consumer's reach. So that they got to reach for it, but they can get it. And that's what price quality leadership is. And it also goes with the price quality leadership is the perception that whatever you price them for, it's worth their value. And so if I were going to give you an example of what I consider to be in those lists, I would certainly say the desktop industry is right now, whether you're talking Hewlett Packard or whatever other desktops. Oh God, the only one I can think of is, well, Acer. Acer's still around as well. But generally it's a very, very thin market nowadays, because when the price of a laptop is the same as a desktop, why would you want it? And you find power to be equal. Maximum market share, certainly the TIs have always been that. They've done an enormously good job on being able to maintain themselves as the number one asset in calculators. And a lot of that has to do is that they just want to be able to have the lowest price possible in manufacturing, and that was their purpose. Maximum market skimming, of course, I put the iPhone up there, and I think that fits. And then in price quality leadership, once again, in terms of consumer perception, I think BMW is one of those that we would reasonably expect. Although I'm just shocked at the way prices are climbing with automobiles now. My gosh. I mean, the automobile prices, they're as expensive as my first house was. So anyway, go ahead. So we talked about what are the objectives. The next thing we need to do is understand what the demand is. And so one of the things we have to know is whether our product is resistant to significant changes of demand by changing price. In other words, is there price elasticity or not? And so what makes a product elastic or inelastic? One thing would be if there are no substitutes or competitors in your particular item list. Okay. And so the first one would be few substitutes. There aren't many substitutes for gas, although there are substitutes for automobiles. Sometimes consumers don't notice the higher price. Even though gas has climbed, what is it, 80 cents in the last 3 months or so. Another is that you're slow to change your buying habits. Or it can't. Okay, you're slow to change buying habits. I will say this, it's kind of interesting because the last, I guess it was 2006 when the last real major spike in gasoline prices went up. The AMA, not the AMA, AAA, American Automobile Association, found that during the summer, Americans drove 300 million less miles during the summer. So you do have an effect. It just takes a while for that to happen, okay? Think the higher prices are justified. You think that, hey, that should be it. And then the price is only a small cost in operation. Price is only a small cost in total operation. Now, all of these are things that are factors that affect the way that consumers go about determining whether they will buy goods or not, or how sensitive they are to price changes. So, this also leads us to consider, so there's the list of them. This also leads us to talk about demand curves, okay? A demand curve is basically the relation between whether or not consumers will buy goods based upon their price. And so depending on a certain cost, there is a given demand. And if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see what a normal curve for normal products are. That as prices climb up, what you find is that the demand will go down. However, and this is one thing that's important, if your particular product is a prestige product, and by prestige, there could be many definitions, whether it's a luxury good, a unique item, a specialized item, you will actually find that demand goes up as the price goes up. And eventually what you get is you get this concave kind of curve where it curves up and away. And so what businesses have to do is ultimately decide what is the better price for them to sell their goods at. It can be anywhere on that list, by the way, and it just depends on what they would consider to be exclusivity. If you're looking at somewhere on the lower bottom end of this curve, that's what you would consider to be affordable luxuries. If you're looking as the curve goes backward in this direction, you're looking at a true luxury items, that items that are also expensive because they're rare, okay? And so rarity is up here on this side, affordable luxuries is somewhere over here, okay? I forgot who did this. It was an economics guy, and he won a Nobel Prize for coming up with it. But it says exactly what you would expect, is that demand curves like this, are expected, especially for items that are considered specialty or prestige items. This, however, is what's considered a demand curve when we're talking about elastic or inelastic prices. And so how do we define whether something is elastic or inelastic? Inelastic demand says there's not a significant change in demand with a significant change in price. In other words, the demand change is not significant. And that's very mealy mouth, but it just basically comes into is that yes, demand changes, but it doesn't change to an extreme. Elastic demand, when there are many competitors, when there are many substitutes for your particular item, that is what makes an item elastic. And that is where a significant change in price will lead to a very significant change in demand. And it goes both ways too. And the difficulty, of course, with elasticity in that way is trying to determine what's the perfect place to be on the line. A lot of that has to do with what your factories consider to be important as well. And so these are some of the factors that reduce sensitivity, somewhat back to what we were talking about. The price is more distinctive. In other words, it's separated. This is one of the reasons why, and I've talked about this before, is there's a real discussion about, oh gosh, who's going to do it? Was it a Swedish firm? It might be Volvo. No. It's a Korean firm is going to come out with an electric vehicle or you buy the car and you lease the batteries, okay? Now, the concern about that is that if you price the batteries separate, then how do consumers react to that? And so if buyers are more aware of substitutes, that might be an issue, okay? If you can have the cost borne by another party, it's not as important. Buyers not being able to store the product, now you're talking when items are in the service category, you tend to be less sensitive to those things because you consume them at the moment. Okay, so we figure out demand, and now we try to estimate cost. Now, I'm not going to really get deep into talking about the costs here, but I do want you to know two types, okay, and how they generally talk, and that is fixed cost and variable costs. Fixed costs are those costs that do not vary with the production or with sales. These are the costs that are incurred just to keep the business open. Legal expenses, leasing on a building, insurance, general and administrative expenses, that gigantic kind of ball of wax. None of those are related to the level of production, and fixed cost, when you price it, generally comes out as what's known as a total cost. And so you round it out into total number of dollars. Variable costs, however, vary directly with the level of production. They are used in the building of a particular item. So this comes into the labor costs, the raw materials, the sub-assemblies, anything that is directly tied to it. And the important thing to think about with variable costs is that's usually priced per production unit. And so the variable cost of making this particular item is $20 a unit, and that's how you price it. And so, of course, the total cost of the sum of those fixed and variable costs, and the average cost of the cost per unit at that level of production, but I'm probably not going to care about that. I just want you to know what fixed and variable costs are. The ability to calculate those costs directly relate to, unfortunately, pricing, but as Dr. Babin would say, your job isn't to be an accountant, your job is to be a marketer, but it's important to know what that means. I hate target costing. I think it is the worst idea that has come in human history, and it has ruined many a model. But having now cursed it, you got to know what it is, okay? So one of the things that is associated with the production of goods is that costs change. That the cost of production will change in that those production costs are variable. They're not fixed to a particular item, okay? And so what target costing means is that you try to squeeze out profit based upon a fixed price of an item. And so the market will set the price of a particular good. And if there's nothing that you can do about changing that price, what target costing means is that you move the cost as few as you can so that you can get the desired profit margin you want. I despise this idea. Have I told you that I don't like it? Here's the reason why, okay? The reason why is that basically your perception is that consumer demand is static and they'll take it no matter what you do with the vehicle, and that is so blatantly false, I don't know how to put it. And I think it's very appropriate that they put a PT Cruiser up here. You didn't know what the PT Cruiser, I'm not sure whether you did or not, but it was built in the mid-90s. built for about, I don't know, 5 years or so. And it actually sold quite well. It was very well made by Chrysler. They still had, Chrysler in the 90s had merged with Daimler. So you had Daimler, Chrysler, and then for a decade, Chrysler's engineering went way up because they had some good interaction with Daimler. Well, they developed the PT Cruiser, which was kind of a cool, kind of retro car. You could get it also with a rag top on it. It was very well, it had good gas mileage. You could buy a standard transmission. And what Chrysler decided to do to it afterwards is they decided they want to squeeze some more profit out of it. So what they did was they started replacing standard equipment with some really cheap stuff. They cheapened up the radio. They went from automatic windows to roll down windows. They took away the convertible. They just made the car cheap. And that's what target costing can do. And so I'm not eventually really a fan of it, but I wanted to go ahead and say it, maybe because I wanted to curse it some more. Anyway, target costing, okay. So you're estimated the cost, and this is one of the strategies that you can use, but if I'm a marketer, I'll never do this. And then the next thing that I want to do also is estimate and analyze my competitors' prices as well. Because you have to take in your competitors' prices, because value price competition means that if you've got something that your competitors don't, then it should be priced in, or you should find some compensation. Or if your competitors do something you don't, you have to take that in compensation and lower your price. And so one of the very difficult things in the airline industry is you're basically comparing apples to apples. Now, there are some other airlines that you don't, like Frontier and some others. Frontier is actually from a very limited number of airports. But one of the things that Frontier will do will run crazy, and I mean crazy discounts on being able to fly out within 2 days. And so my brother has flown more than once to Austin to see his daughter for $40 out of New Orleans, okay? And so that's an example of, value price competition and some of the things that you can do to make it different. But just realize this is that you have to be compensated. If you do something more that than your competition doesn't, you should be able to charge more. And if you don't, then you should charge less. And so, with all of that, we're now going to set a pricing method. So, when we look at prices, we're looking at the ideal prices exist within a certain window, okay? Within a certain window. The blue area is ultimately where we want to hit the price, okay? The bottom area where the price and the cost are the same are what are known as the price floor. And the price at which a consumer will absolutely accept it is what's known as the price ceiling. Now, what you find in the pricing, especially when you're looking in relationship to competitors, is there's going to be an orientation point in which the competitors' prices generally are. And then what you want to do, if you have unique abilities that are valued by the consumer, you want to be able to put your price point somewhere above the orientation point. And so the customer's assessment of your unique product features, things that are desirable to the consumer, makes you want to put it into that upper hemisphere. However, if you are a price or a loss leader, And so in other words, those particular prices, or you don't have some of the benefits that other products do, you put it lower. I got into this thing where I was collecting tablets, Android tablets. And I was buying really the cheap ones, like 20 bucks and 30 bucks, and trying to see how they were. And they actually work quite well. The real difference between them all was basically that the screens were not better, okay? But I found that they were all perfectly functional, and they did everything that the Samsung did, but the Samsung's screens were just brilliant, okay? Then that's the other thing about the iPad too. And in the lexicon world of where tablets are, the Samsung is somewhere around slightly above the orienting point, but the iPod is right up, or the iPad is right up against the ceiling price, okay? And so the sweet spot that you want to hit when you're selecting a pricing method is somewhere in the middle, all right? And whether you want to do it above the orienting point or below it depends on the number of substitutions for your product. In other words, it's not as unique, or the fact that your product is special and that it can be priced above. I want you to also think of these things as well when you're doing your casework and considering the products you're selling and thinking about where your goods should stack. Once again, you have the perception when buyers buy your product that they perceive a certain image and quality. And so these are KWs, these are Kentworth trucks, by the way. And they have a legendary reputation in the United States. Volvo has a very good reputation as well. They have one of the finest diesel engines that has ever been built. And so these particular goods can command the prices they are because the buyer's image on the product, the perceived value and the reputation is second to none. I paid a very sweet price for my Toyota, and a lot of that had to do is just the overwhelming desire that consumers have for that particular item. I went in priced a 4x4, like a Jeep. They're wanting 80 grand for those things. That's like insane. But then again, it's all based upon the perceptions, and believe me, you get it. Just amazing. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is that when you're pricing, you might also have something else that's called EDLP. EDLP. Back in the 90s and 2000s, when Walmart was going through their major renovations and they were building a supply chain second to none, and they were doing commercials about how they were knocking prices off, they decided that one of the expenses that they could do without is constantly advertising price. And so they went to do what was called everyday low pricing, EDLP. And what everyday low pricing means is that Walmart prices are subject to change without notice, and those prices change constantly with little or no promotion at all. They eliminate the need for constant advertisement, and once consumers catch on that the price is always going to be the lowest price possible, you get another benefit. Consumers walk in your store to see what the price is. And I was reading an article on the omnichannel, and one of the things that omnichannel was saying was, and this is something you understand in channels, is that the consumer performs channel functions, especially when they shop retail. When a consumer comes in, they take the goods off the shelf, they bring them to the counter, they ring them up, and they put them in the car. They perform a function of the channel. Well, Online, you have the problem what's called BOPIS, B-O-P-I-S, which means buy online, pick up in store. And what that does is that it reduces the margins significantly, because now what happens is once it's stocked on the shelf, you've got to get someone to pull it off the shelf and put it somewhere else. And that's caused a major issue. So, everyday low pricing, EDLP. So, I'm not going to worry about auction type pricing, and I'm not going to worry about the selecting the final price, but I will talk about loss leaders and special events. Loss leaders are not necessarily unethical or immoral, they're just there, okay? The loss leader is a particular item which is priced unseasonably low in order to generate that traffic to come in the store. And so if they bring 10 to 15 more people into the store, an item in which they lose money ultimately gains from traffic. Now, the last one is what's known as special event pricing, and this was a dirty little trick that Walmart did for about a decade. So under the law, you can price goods below cost if you're doing that in terms of some kind of grand opening. Not only can you produce them or price them below your cost, but any other participating store you have in your string can do the same thing as well. And you can do that for up to 2 months. In the 90s, Walmart was opening a new store in the United States every 6 weeks. And so for a space of a couple of years, Walmart was pricing the majority of their goods below cost. Now they can't do that anymore because the competition's awful hot. But that's kind of one of those things that you could do. Oh, cash rebates. Let me also talk about those. So in the 80s, Chrysler Corporation wanted to come up with a way that they could encourage individuals to come into their stores. And so they created or came up with the idea of a cash rebate for their particular goods. So what's a rebate? A rebate is money that is returned to you for the purchase of an item. And so when you bought a Chrysler, you would get a $700 check sent back to you. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but we're talking about 1983, where the average price of an automobile was between $4,000 and $8,000. So it was actually a fairly nice chunk of money. You'd probably come up to like $2,000, $2,500 nowadays. Now, they've gotten awful fancy with rebates now, because with rebates now, you get the card, you get a debit card, and you usually end up with $5 or $6 that are left on the card that you can't cash out, but you can. And the other thing that's a dirty little secret about rebates now is that applying for rebates, 1 out of 5 consumers won't apply. And so the rebates actually are good for doing advertisement, but unfortunately the consumers don't always go about and apply for the rebate. I have. You bet I have. Okay. So the last thing to talk about is to discuss what happens when you have to change. And so eventually, or most times, we have to consider the concept of price changes. and I should say price cuts. And there are difficulties when you cut prices. When companies start cutting prices, it encourages customers to demand further price cuts. And it trains salespeople to offer them. So when I worked at Con Appliances, there's one in Gastonia, as a matter of fact. I used to work at Con Appliances in Lafayette. One of the things that we knew is you could look at it and know how much money you could come off to spur a price or to spur a consumer from buying. And one of the things that they really was difficult is they tried to tell the salespeople, look, don't come off the price right away. You want, and the problem is that as a salesperson, you want to pull that trigger. You want to get that thing. So price concessions generally means that consumers demand more. The other is you have to be careful what's called the low quality trap, is that when you cut prices, consumers will assume that quality is low. And here's a big one, and this also has to go with sales and sales promotions, okay? And that is what's called the fragile market share. You can get sales, you can buy sales through price cuts, but you can't buy loyalty, okay? One of the reasons that you attempt to do sales promotions is that you try to get consumers to consider brand switching. And all of the research tells us, unfortunately, is that consumers will not brand switch. They are loyal. And so when the prices return to where they were, consumers will go back to what they normally buy. And I'll also say this as well. Companies can get drunk on cutting costs. When's the last time you bought a pizza without checking to see what the specials were? That's one of the problems, okay? What can also happen is what's called the shallow pockets trap, is that you can have competitors that have deeper pockets than you, that they can handle lower costs far longer than you. And so if you initiate a price cut and they follow, then you're really in a pickle. And then finally, the ultimate worst is what's called the price war. And this is where competitors will respond by lowering their prices even more and starting a price war where prices get lowered and lowered and lowered and lowered. And so that basically ends this chapter on pricing. Like everything, pricing is a strategy, pricing is a plan. And that when you look at your particular goods, when you're looking at your cases, I urge you to consider what are the current pricing strategies that they're using. And realize this, if you modify the pricing strategies, what do you ultimately change at the same time? Remember this, is that you will affect your current consumers when you change price as much as you will change future ones. So be careful, okay? All right, so tonight or tomorrow, please, if you would, just send me your group's recommendation as to which case you would like, and I will try to publish them tomorrow night. Any other questions or anything anybody wishes to say? Okay, folks, it's been a pleasure. I will see you online in 2 weeks, and we will start right off with the cases. And so the best to you. Have a good couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Dr. Shells, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Have you determined the groups already?
Oh, I'm sorry, we had, didn't we? I mean, I'd sent out the groups and they had met. Let me do this, I apologize. I'll go ahead and send the groups out again. I apologize for that, I thought that all the groups, had met. Maybe you weren't in that time, okay, Polly? I'll go ahead and send out the groups and I'll go ahead and send your emails, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You bet, Polly. Take care.